All right. So the document that you see on the screen now is the training guide that we submitted or sent around to departments when we first implemented the 3.0 OGM forms. You could use this document because it gives a lot of good information on, and screenshots on how the system works and the different types of grants that you might encounter in your process. So I want to walk through this really quickly. We're going to talk about the funding map process and why that's important. Then we're going to talk about the difference between on-cycle grants and off-cycle grants. And then we're going to do an example of the setup of a grant through the entire process from gen entry all the way to what we call the pre-award form. That is going to encompass pretty much the process that departments have to follow. And then we have a second presentation that we're going to talk about for the GPAD, CAPS process, fund letter, and grant letter process. This happens in business objects and in FMPS, and the departments don't know about this process because it's specific to GPAD. So I'm going to scroll through, and I'll make this available on the SharePoint site, the Central Grants SharePoint site, and also I'll send it to you guys via email.
Thank you.
So we implemented OGM 3.0 January of 2021. The expectation there is for us, the city, to move away from multiple reporting platforms. So we were first in SharePoint and also in the older forms of FMPS. And that meant that departments were doing a lot of double entry, and we were, it was creating a lot of bottlenecks and burden in the process. And we didn't have the transparency really to see how long it was taking for departments to establish their grants in the system, because it was so it's antiquated, and it's also a separated process, or it was a separated process. So we couldn't tell when departments were working in SharePoint how long it took them or why it was taking them so long to establish their grant programs in FMPS. So this new system consolidates the entire process from SharePoint and FMPS all into one. And we'll talk about each of these forms, but the forms that we created consist of the first form, which is where you get your segments. We call it the gen entry form. Then we have an application form, an appropriation form, a pre-award form, and then we also have a closeout form. You guys don't see it now, but we're working on that on the back end. These are the different types of grants that you might encounter. So some grants have one grant agreement, and it has a standard term of 1 year, or maybe it's just a 1 or 2 year grant, and it's one agreement. In this instance, that grant, we assign one specific federal aid number and one fund number for the life of that agreement. So that's grants awarded for one performance period. That performance period could be 1 year, or it could be 2 years, 3 years, but it's considered under one agreement, it's considered one term. That also means that the federal agency releases or allows for the authorization of spending across that 1 or 2 year program. So you don't get one budget for 1 year and you don't get a second budget for the second year. You get one budget at the time of the agreement. Then we have other types of grants that are called pass-through grants. Those grants are grants that we get from other agencies that are not considered a non-federal or non-state entity that provides subawards to a subrecipient to carry out part of a program. That is our pass-through. So we get federal or state funding from other agencies, and we pass through those, or we receive the funds through a pass-through organization. If that's the case, same rules apply. We establish a new fund number for that program, but we have to track that program from the originating source, which is the federal source, or the state source. I don't know why I'm trying to figure out why we mentioned subrecipients, but I don't want to lose track. So we'll talk about pass-through grants in more detail. Grant agreements that have multiple department resources, but has a single lead. An example of this type of grant is we get one major agreement, but the services are provided across different departments. So an example is like the Community Development Block Grant or the UISI program or bioterrorism grants. Those grants are shared or crossed between different units of our government. So, for example, our Department of Public Safety Administration can be the lead department responsible for managing and coordinating all the efforts for the UISI program. They then have to create what we call like MOUs or some type of a understanding with each of those other departments that are going to be we call them like sub awards, or but basically those are other departments that provide resources for that lead department to execute that grant program. The lead department in that case is responsible for all of the reporting to the federal government and coordinating all the efforts across the different departments. Because that's one agreement in the system, we assign one federal aid number that's shared and fund number that's shared across all of the departments that fall under that agreement. So if it's UISI, UISI is going to have one federal aid number and one fund number, and then that information is going to be shared across the other units of government like police or AIS, OEMC, or the fire department, and then they will share the same fund number and share the same federal aid number for that grant agreement. Then you can have some grants that we have one grant agreement, but we receive multiple allocations or budgets each year under that agreement. So you can have one grant agreement that covers 10 years, but each year the federal government gives a separate award or separate budget, and you can call it an award under that agreement. In this case, the structure moving forward from 2021 is that each of those grants will get assigned one federal aid number and that federal aid number lives with that agreement through the life. So if it's a 10-year program, it keeps the same federal aid number for the whole 10 years. But each of the budget years or award years are going to be separated by fund. Then you have some grant agreements that require matching, cash matches. And this is where we put non-federal resources towards a grant that requires a federal supplement. And so in that case, we have to track the local resource, which is the city's match, and the originating source, which could be federal or state, and that's tracked against that same grant agreement. That also means that because it's under the same agreement, all of the same rules apply to that grant. If it's a federal grant and we put matching funds to it, the matching funds assumes the same responsibilities, rules and regulations as that grant agreement. The costs that are going to be eligible against that grant are always going to be consistent with the agreement. So if it's ineligible against the grant, it's going to be ineligible against the match. However, some departments, especially like CDOT, they'll set aside, and I don't know if it's called force accounts, but they'll set aside like a reserve for things that are going to be deemed ineligible, and they'll pay from local resources that they won't submit to the federal government or state government, but that was a part of the project cost. Then you have some grants that have a grant agreement, but it requires an in-kind match. So you don't have to actually put cash towards it, but the value of the resource has to be calculated and tracked. The Head Start program is an example of an department that not outsources. Well, I would say for this meeting, they outsource the in-kind matching requirements to their subrecipients. So to their delegate agencies, they require them to put up in-kind services to meet the requirements of the match. Those in-kind services can be existing personnel. It could be non-personnel costs that they're putting up towards the program, and the value of that is considered in-kind matching. You then have grant agreements that have program income and that generate revenue. In those cases, we have to track the revenue separate from the regular federal or state or private grant. And in those cases, we have one federal aid number, but we'll have two separate fund numbers to track the different sources. Then you have some grants that are received from the private entities. In most cases, because we don't know where the grant is going to come from, when we budget for those grants, we typically budget for those grants under a standard fund number, one fund number. And that fund number, so this is different from the rest of the process. If it's a private grant, typically we'll keep the same fund number, and each of the awards that we receive under each private entity will receive a different federal aid number. Capital projects with multiple sources. We're going to be seeing a lot of capital projects funded through bonds, TIF, and possibly some ARP stuff. But those capital projects are funded with multiple different funds, and we try to link the same project number for each of those different funds so that they can cross-allocate expenses. Then you have certain types of grants that we receive in the form of a grant, but it's really a settlement. The Anadarko grant, or DARCO grant, is an example that's of a grant that we received a settlement from some issues that happened with the Anadarko land. And I'm not an expert in that area, but ultimately the federal government made a settlement, and this private organization had to pay, I think it was like 10 or 20 million to the city as a result of all of these like toxic gases that were being emitted or whatever. So that happens. And in some cases, if they give us the funds in the form of an agreement, then we have to track that separately as a grant. So those are the different types of grants that we have. So based on that, definition of the different types of grants that we could have, these are the different structures of grants that you can experience. So when we talk about federal aid numbers, this is the main tracker for each agreement. In the past, the city did not use this policy, so we just implemented this policy in 2021. So you will see some older grants that goes into 2021 that didn't follow this process. But moving forward, all of our grants that we receive for a new agreement will get a single Fed aid number, unless it's a private grant. And I will caution, because this was implemented in 2021, you will still have some older grants that we have to follow the old policy. So in those cases, those will be special instances where different accounting teams have to know which grants may, because it's in parallel. So which grants are a part of the older process and policy versus which ones are a part of the new. Each fund is separated by funding source. So you can have a federal funding source, a state funding source, program income, those type of things. Reporting categories are used for regular grants that are non-capital. Capital grants use projects and subphases. This has an entirely separate chart of account structure that they follow to track different types of expenses and categories for capital. One grant can have one Fed aid number, one fund number, and multiple reporting categories. Each of the reporting categories helps us, if we establish it properly, report appropriately to the federal or state agency according to their requirements. It also helps us from the city perspective do our reporting if it's set up appropriately. So that's important because some departments will try to use the reporting category to isolate out like certain types of contract cost, but we have a purchase order system. So we technically can report against the PO, and you can have one reporting category and you don't have to separate them into multiple. But that, we're trying to shift into understanding the different elements and different ways that we can report. In the FMPS system, we also have a subledger, and in the subledger, we track award level details and project level details. So each award is separated by the federal aid number, and that's going to be for each agreement. So you're going to have one award, but you can have multiple projects under that award. Wait, I think I said that backwards. Wait a minute. I said that backwards. I'm sorry. The award is the agreement. I haven't done this in a while, so we'll come back to that. I'll clarify if it should be a one-to-many or many-to-one. But the award and the project are going to be system generated numbers, and it's going to be based on the funding source. So we'll come back to that. We also define things for lead departments and how they should set up the structure for their programs. Okay, so we're going to have a unique award and a unique project for each one. Okay, so we're not going to go through each of these. I'll make this available, but I wanted to walk through the basic premise of this. And then now I'm going to show you in the system, in our test system, what it looks like. So if you want to do this from your team, from your office, if you don't have access into the testing instance, you can ask the FMPS chip security to give you access into the different testing instances. You can find the test instance. I always type in DP. If I'm on the server, I'll type in DPS / and it'll take me to the city's intranet site. If you can't remember that, you can always go to my.cityofchicago.org and it'll take you to the intranet site. And then you have to navigate to the department that has the training resources, which is under the Department of Procurement Services. I want to make sure I go to the right place. I want to lead y'all in the wrong direction. Let me see where this is. Who this is under. It's under Procurement Services, FMPS instances. Oh, I thought it was under here. Maybe it's not. So don't type in, just type in DPS /. Oh, okay. Well, okay, now we're recording. So go to my.chicago.gov and then go to Procurement Services. Under Procurement Services, there's the link to that DPS site, or you can go to the FMPS testing instances. You see that that's a 5-level process, but so if you can just remember, if you're on the server, to just enter in DPS /, it's going to take you right to the spot. So we test in any of these instances, and this APS PROD is production. I'm going to test today in Jade, but this is the closest clone to production, and you'll be able to see the dates in which each of the production clones happen. The reason I'm in Jade for us is because some of these, even though it says February, it might not include all of our most recent code for grants. So for grants, our technical FMPS team are working in Jade. So make sure you get access to Jade so you can play around and kind of learn the process. Then play with the process. So when you go into FMPS, you guys will have a different view than I have. My view is different because we help departments establish their grants, but you guys will have like a comp GA, I think it is, where you can see across all of the department's information. Let's see. So if I'm a department, my first step in the process would be to go to my grants accounting home, and that's the GA. So when you go into GA, the system currently has the old forms that we used to use, and now we have this new section called Grants Management Home, and this is where the new information is being entered, and this is also where we've moved out of SharePoint, and now all of our information is here. So in the old SharePoint system, departments had to go in and complete their application, then they had to go and complete an award document, and then they had to go and ask for their segments for the grants. And then once they received all of that information, then they had to go and create a project. They had to create an award. They had to do an award budget, and then they had to complete a funding pattern. So this process is hopefully it's really aimed at streamlining the process. So we've re-engineered the process so that departments get access to their segments up front. And then from there, they move into the other phases, which is the appropriation phase, to confirm that they have appropriation authority for that grant. And then they can go and apply for the grant and submit the grant for pre-award approval. So the first step for departments is to go into the gen entry form. and they have different paths that they're going to take. So this is just a map on the next steps of the process. So first you do your gen entry, then you go into it's missing the appropriation, but the appropriation tab should be here, then the new application and new award. But in order for a department to enter a new request, they have to go to new general entry request. But if they don't know exactly what what's already entered, they can enter their department number and hit search. These are all of the grants that the police department has entered into the system. And so if you were to go and check, let's look at UISI. So this one is shared across multiple departments. So if I was to go to UISI, and this fund number is the fund number that we assign during the annual budgeting process. So if you also, just for reference, you want to make sure that you go to that you understand how to review the budget book. So the budget book is the annual ordinance that governs the expenditures for each of our grant programs. So we recognize our revenue, our anticipated revenue, and then we reflect our anticipated expenses. So if I was to go to my Department 57, and I go and look for my UISI program under G188, I think it was. Here it is, G188. This department has authorization to enter in $8.6 million in 2022 funding. But if you look, you'll see other UISI programs from prior years that they still have authorization to spend. So OV27 still exists, OW96, but these are all carryover funds. But this is the fund that the department has requested access to in our new system. So that's one reference that you guys can check. And this is the grant entry here. So they give us, so we give them ahead of time, we work through the annual budget process and we work through all the values. The value process starts, the value assignment process starts with the gen entry. So each department has to come here and request their information. And once this is approved, this becomes their fund number and segment information that we then put in the budget process. This process, we typically start around April. So I'm going to be bugging you guys with the departments. We'll be bugging you guys probably around April to give new assignments for the next year. So we'll be working on 2023, and the department is going to come here and request their next year's value. For grants that are shared across departments, we have to make sure that they share the same values. So that's one check that we have to do when they're submitting requests, is to see if this is shared with another department and to make sure that we assign the same values to all of those departments that falls under this program. So that happens during the budget assignment process. And like I said, we'll start that in April. So the department went and created this request. They entered in their basic information, which is what we call the top half of the form. And then the bottom half of the form is where they enter in the more details. We have a fund tab where the department identifies the fund that they want, and then a reporting category tab. And this is where they identify the different types of reporting, the reporting structure. So we always ask them to enter a revenue code because we need to reflect the revenue under this fund, but the department has the independence to establish as many reporting categories as they need and to ask for the name of different categories to be different. But because this is a general grant, they ask just for one expenditure line. But if this was a certain type of grant, like our COVID programs, some of the COVID grants ask us to separate costs by different expense lines. So then we'll have for example, masks category, or a public assistance category, or something like that, to help when we have to go back into the federal or state agencies and we can pull this information, we can report it by their different categories. So it's really important to figure out upfront what the structure should be, but that's what the department is entering. Then they have to enter in their personnel. This is the driver of the workflow for each of our requests. So the request first goes from the department the reviewer, the department manager, then it goes over to the SAS team who assigns these values, these segments, and then it goes to the GPAD team, the accountant level, the supervisor, and the director level. You see my name here because I probably was hounding the department to put this information in so that we can put it in the budget book. So that's why you see that. But typically, it should be a department reviewer and a department manager that's driving the workflow, because they're going to be the ones to get the notifications on this item and when it gets approved. So this is the segments that, or these are the segments that were assigned by the by SAS. And you see it twice because this first column is the request from the department. In this case, we coordinated with UWASI programs and made sure that all of them requested the same value. And these were the values that were assigned. The first 2 years of the program of the reporting category identifies the first start date of the grant. If this is a 5-year program, this grant will keep 2022 all the way through the life of that grant. The department can also request additional reporting categories if they wanted to by coming here and adding the reporting category. Under the budget section, these are the sections, the numbers that we use to track back to our ordinance. So if I was to come here, in a perfect world, it should say, I don't know why it doesn't, but it should say 280V. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but we'll figure out why. But we can update this. But this should reflect the same number that was in the ordinance book. And typically our 25 series is restricted to CDBG. So just a note, this is a free form. So this does not have any validations, which is my challenge right now. But you guys don't have to pay attention to this. This is a OBM tab that we have to make sure relates back to our ordinance. This is also where departments can add attachments. So this is where they want to add attachments to help confirm a lot of the reporting category requests or the CFDA numbers that they're putting with each of the reporting categories. So this is where, if you don't know what the CFDA number, but the agency said it was a federal grant, they can give you support documentation from either existing conversations or existing information that you got from the grantor or from a prior grant. So UWASI, we've gotten this grant for years. So, the department can technically upload a previous copy and say, this is a, proof that this is a federal program, for example. And that's because a lot of times when we start this process, the department does not actually have the grant agreement. So this is a good example. This one started October 1st, 2022. So the department likely does not have the grant agreement for this program. But just a reference, if you have any questions, you can always ask the department to upload support documents. And then when they upload them, they can add a note to say, I just uploaded the file. It's just a sample, whatever. So this is kind of what they see. Now and I should say this. So once the department completes this form, they then submit this form for review, and then you guys can approve and review it. And once it's approved fully, then it's good to go. After the approval process, and when you guys get to the pre-award form, this tab is going to be relevant. And we'll talk about that in a second. But as you see, the departments or OBM, we don't have access to see everything in this section, but this is only visible or editable by the GPAD team. So this is where you guys would go and work with the revenue team to get a specific CAPS code for this program. And then you would come here to update the information, save it, and as well as the bank account information. You would save this, and then this is what goes into the fund letters and the grant setup letters in the pre-award form. So that's an example of the gen entry process. Once that general entry is approved, the department can then move into the next step of the process. This step of the process is the appropriation. So each of these grants should have an approved appropriation. If it doesn't have an approved appropriation, it means that this grant is not set up in the system. So if I go to this one was the example that we used in the previous. So the 8.6, you should see. So they have authorization for 8.6 million under G188 for urban area security, according to the annual ordinance. So this is where the department can go and enter in their projected budget. They can add as many lines as they need to. In this case, they only selected a professional service line. What happens after the department enters this information is OBM takes this information and we'll put it in our Chicago budget system. We are working on an interface now that's going to pull this data and upload it into our CBS system, so we don't have to manually enter it. But that's a project we're working on. But in April and May, we asked the departments to come here and complete their requests so that they can have their information reflected in the annual budget. And as you see, the annual budget is at the high level. It's just at the fund level. But we require departments to put in account level details so that we could, it's going to help them in the pre-award process. That's pretty much all that's important on this form. OBM is the only one to approve this form. And if we needed to, same thing, same rules apply. We need to make sure that these numbers are correct. And actually, these should have pulled forward from the other one. Like I said, it's a 2021 project, so we still have some fixing to do. But this is our OBM's form. When we approve the ordinance, after it's approved for the upcoming year, then we upload a copy of the budget for reference. Same rules apply with notes. We can have notes and ask for notes. The notes from the prior screen carries over into the new screens. We just implemented this back in November, I think. So this is a new functionality. This did not exist in this training manual. So when you look at the training manual and you get down into some of the screenshots, you won't see a tab that says notes, but you will see it in the production. And so when we update these screenshots, you'll have the most current. But this is also stuff you can reference back to in the manual. So when the department completes the gen entry, they complete the appropriation form. The next step in their process is to either complete an application or an award. Those are the last two steps in the process. But so we're doing it all in one, but most often departments do this over time. So let's say months have passed, the appropriation has been approved, and now the department has to submit an application. Some departments have application requirements and some don't. This is a lead, UIZ has a lead department. So typically award or applications are not required for the other departments under the lead, because it's the lead department's responsibility to submit those applications. So you won't likely see anything for UIZ here, but this is if an application was required. The department indicated that at the general entry phase, and the system requires them to complete an application. And so the system tracks the application number, the appropriation number, and the general entry. And as we continue to move forward, it's going to then add the award number. So we can track everything by fund number, general entry number, appropriation number, or application number, or Fed aid. So we have created a tree. So the application, I'm just going to click on a random one, but an application basically leverages the information that was captured from before. So departments don't necessarily have to update this information, with the exception of these two fields. This is where the department gives us a more detailed outcome metric. Some departments are using this for descriptions. So we're trying to encourage them to use the description field for the actual narrative of the program, and the expected outcomes should be based on a numeric metric. So either you purchased a vessel, or you renovated one marine, vessel, something like that. But we'll get there. So the application takes the same information that was captured from the previous screen, which is the appropriation screen, and it allows departments to take that budget that was already entered and modify it if they need to. So it's a progressively elaborative process where departments enter information in one area and they can continue to update it until they get to the pre-award stage. So this is where they go and build out their detailed budget. This budget, because it's an application, should be consistent with the application documents. So if they have a budget in here, and that they should have a budget with the application. This budget and the details should be consistent with the form. So I'm just looking to see where the cost elements here. And this is where you guys can talk to the department and say, well, you indicated that you guys were going to have 1.3 for the federal portion and 437 for equipment. And if I go to my budget, then we should only see that amount for equipment. And when I go to my other, which is the City of Chicago share, I should see that 400,000 here. So this is where we try to get the departments to understand the importance of a quality control review prior to submitting this information to the granting agency. Some grants are on the pre-approved list, and that means that they can bypass the application form initially, but they still have to comply with the application and award review process. And we'll talk about that in more depth, but the pre-approved process allows departments to use this budgeted amount to make their projections. And as long as they don't exceed this budgeted amount, they can actually build out their line item budget, whether or not they have an application or an award in place. But at a later time, they have to come back when they have to submit that application and they have to complete the application form. So that's the application process. So now the department has completed the general entry, the appropriation, and application if it's applicable. Now the pre-award form is where the departments go to get their grants approved for baseline. So in this department, in this department, let me see if I can find the UI. Oh, UIZ wouldn't be here because it is October 1st, 2022. So let's go. Okay, so one thing you can do here, if you hover over the status, a pop-up, if you have pop-ups option open, you can actually see the workflow. So you can see when the item was submitted by the department, entered by the department, when it was submitted by the reviewer, when it was approved by the internal department manager, and then it went through the GPAD review and approval process. So that's what happened here. If I was to click into this award, this is similar to the other grant program, but this is where the department can update their budget, submit their attachments, and identify any requirements for FAFATA or other. We also have this new tab for fund letter. This was implemented, I think, in December or January of either December of 2021 or January 2022, but it's fairly new. But this is where GPAD would come and update this section to include either the fund letter or the final grant setup letter or conditional setup letter. So the difference between those three is the grant fund letter is specific to the city treasury. This only is necessary when a new fund is being created. When a new fund is created, the system will generate this letter. So you guys have to go into the business object system and and refresh this letter, put in the associated values, and then the system will spit out or will give you this report. This is the fund letter, like grant fund letter, and it's only relevant to the treasury. So in the past, we used to use the fund letter for a multitude of things. Now we've separated it out so that we don't have to hold up the grant setup process because certain values or letters were not approved. So the grant fund letter process is ready and available after the general entry form is approved. Because at that point, you guys can go and contact the revenue team and get the associated CAPS numbers. This is where you want to go to that field in the gen entry form and update that CAPS code tab. Let me show you that one. So that's where you want to come here. And this happens after it's been approved. The gen entry has been approved. You guys will come back to this CAPS code section and you would send a separate email to the revenue team to secure the necessary CAPS codes for this program. Then you guys will enter the CAPS code information, and once it's entered into the system, then the business object system can pull in that data. So this letter can be done at the time of pre-award, or you can do it after the gen entry has been approved, and you can work, because at that point, the fund has already been created in our financial system. So a fund exists as soon as that gen entry is approved. So technically, as soon as the gen entry is approved, you guys can work with the revenue team to get the necessary CAPS codes, bank account information if needed, and then submit this form to the Treasury. The next form or next letter is the conditional grant letter. So the conditional grant letter is needed when we have a grant that was on the pre-approved list, but it does not have an executed grant agreement. In that case, OBM and Finance authorizes this grant to be set up conditionally. The condition is that departments have to still work to secure the final executed agreement. And if it's a budget change from when the agreement is received, that department is responsible for making the necessary budget changes. They should be doing this monthly and updating FMPS to reflect in the notes that they are waiting on the agreement, because at a certain point, if that agreement is not received after 3 months or 6 months, we have to do frequent check-ins. Then we have to contact the department and tell them, if you don't have an agreement by this time, these expenses are going to transfer to your local fund. And now they're no longer grant eligible. Then we have, just go here. Then we have the final executed grant setup letter. And this final executed grant setup letter occurs when the final executed agreement is received. When that final executed agreement is received, then you guys will go into the pre-award form, go into the fund letter tab, and add a row to add the final grant setup letter or the conditional grant setup letter. You have to include the right, it's a drop down. I don't have this view, so let me go to this presentation. So I don't have the view, so I'm just going to use the presentation to kind of walk us through it. So the stuff we just talked about after the gen entry form is approved, then you guys can secure the CAPS code information, and then you guys are going to work towards getting the final letters. So all this information we'll send via email and make sure we upload it on SharePoint. But it just gives instructions on how you go to update the CAPS code in the gen entry form, and then what the different fund letters are for, and then it goes into where you find the letters in the business object system. And then this is where, from your view, this is where you guys would go and select the drop down for the appropriate letter. So if it's a conditional letter and you select conditional, you have to upload the conditional attachment in order for that grant to be baselined. If it's a final letter, you have to select conditional. You upload that conditional letter, and I don't really change the head. I mean, when the report comes out, I don't change the name of it. I don't know why. It just works for me, so I just leave it in. But some people have changed the name, and sometimes they get errors. So I would say, download the report, upload it. Hopefully, if you upload it with a different name, it'll work. If not, let me know and we can talk that through. But make sure you put in the fund number. If it's multiple fund numbers, you have to add a row for each of the fund numbers, and the conditional letter is going to be for each fund. So you have to, or the final grant setup letter. So you have to make sure you select the right letter type and that you upload the right letter in order for the system to allow you to approve this award. If you select fund letter, for example, and you upload the conditional letter, the system is going to give you an error, and it's going to tell you that a final letter is, or a fund setup letter or conditional letter is needed. After you've updated this information, then you can go and approve the item via the notification. So you're going to get a notification in your work list, that's going to tell you that an item is ready for your review. So when you go there, this is where you can go to either approve or reject the item. In this instance, it's a gen entry request. And if you want, you can go to this gen entry link to see the item before you approve it. I don't know if this is going to work because it's testing, but of course not. But ideally in live, if you click this link, it'll take you to this item and then you can approve it or reject it. But that's pretty much the process from start to finish. Any questions?
I actually do have a question. When you were saying you're uploading the documents, you can do it all at once, or you have to do them one by one?
In the pre-award form?
Yes.
Yeah, these you have to load one at a time. And the system, let me show you how it looks in the system when you upload. So if I come here, you can do two ways. You can add an attachment here by going to select this, browse, and then upload whatever attachment. Or you can click in attachment and then you can add it, but it has to be one at a time. You can choose to name it, and you can say, I want to name this. The reason I don't put a title sometimes, and this is just me, is because what if I put conditional fund letter, but this attachment is not a conditional fund letter? What if it's just the final grant setup? So now you've created an inconsistency. So just try to keep it clean if you can. I'm not the perfect one for that, but just try to make sure that, you know, whatever title you name this, that it is the actual name of the document. So you could choose to leave this blank if you need to, and just hit apply. If you want to add multiple documents, you can click add another, and then the system will allow you to add more.
Okay, so let's say I made a mistake and I put in the wrong title. Can I go back and delete that, remove it, and then?
Yeah, so if you made a mistake, well, yeah, if you made a mistake and let's say you named this incorrectly, let's do it. Let's go and name this. If the attachment is named wrong, you can't do that. You have to delete the file. But if it is like, so it'll change the name, but the source of the file is different on the back end. So let's see, if I wanted to change this, I can rename it. So that it's easy to distinguish, but in the background, the system still, this is the name of the file in the background.
Okay. Yep. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and same rules. If you want to delete something, the system is going to give you that. Are you sure you want to do this? And then you can delete it. All of these attachments can come from one place or multiple places. So it can come from the gen entry form, appropriation form, and it just carries over into the next form. Same with the notes. If we added notes in previous forms, those notes will carry over into the award form, and it'll tell you the source. So it'll tell you if it came from a gen entry question or note or from the appropriation or whatnot.
I actually do have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
So when you like delete something, like let's say you deleted something by error, are you able to relive that, like revert the action, or that's final?
It's final.
Okay.
I will say this data is maintained on a server. If you absolutely needed to find something that was deleted accidentally, you can contact 4Data and work through the process with them to see if the system refreshed or if it captured that data. Certain programs, so let me just, if a grant is in a submitted status, for example, the system won't let you delete this item. It's going to tell you that only draft items or only draft items can be deleted. So if I was in this draft and I want to delete it because it's in a status of draft, it'll let me. Oh, it should have let me. Only draft status can delete. Okay, hate using tests on a recorded line. In the real production system, this will be, you'll be able to delete drafts only. But if it's approved or submitted, it won't allow for deletions. All right. So that's the OGM setup process, pretty much start to finish. What I'm going to do is share the 2021 version of the training manual. We did this December 2020. So I'll share this, but like I mentioned before, we have been making enhancements. So like this version does not include the new tab for notes, or it doesn't include the new fun letter tab on the pre-award form. That information is going to be on this document so that you guys can see the fun letter process. All right. Well, we're here. If you need us, let us know. We have 2 new members of our team, Chloe and Hamid. So they're going to be, I'm training them also. So feel free to reach out to any of us if you have questions, and we'll help you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Latoya.
All right. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.